Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. The Ouija board told me a stranger would knock on my door. Last night, it happened. Alright, so this story might sound insane, but bear with me, because I swear it happened. And trust me, I wouldn't have believed it either if I wasn't living through it. I'll just start at the beginning, and you guys can decide for yourselves whether I'm crazy or not. About a month ago, a few friends and I were hanging out at my place, doing what we usually do, eating pizza, watching YouTube, and messing around on the internet. We've always been into weird stuff, you know, like creepy videos, deep web horror stories, that kind of thing. It's not that we actually believe in any of it, but there's something fun about getting spooked with your friends. Anyway, it was a pretty chill night until Eric, one of my friends, starts talking about this Ouija board he found in his attic. You know, one of those classic old wooden ones with the letters carved into it. I didn't think much of it at first because, well, it's Eric. He's always into dumb, spooky stuff and pulling pranks, so I figured he just found it while digging through his parents' old junk. But then he drops the bomb. I dare you to play it. Now, I'm not really superstitious, but I'm also not exactly into inviting bad vibes. Like, who actually messes with a Ouija board for fun? You hear too many stories about people contacting spirits or inviting something in that they can't get rid of. But I also didn't want to back down and look like a chicken in front of everyone. Plus, there were 6 of us there, so I figured it'd just be a laugh. What's the worst that could happen, right? So we set the board up in the middle of my living room. The lights were dim, and we even lit a couple of candles, because, you know, if you're going to do something dumb like this, you might as well go full cliché. I'm not proud of it, but I remember actually feeling a little nervous as we placed our fingers on the planchette, that little piece you move around the board. Eric starts off, of course. He's grinning like a kid who's just about to pull off the best prank of his life. "Is anyone there?" he asks in this ridiculous spooky voice, and we all start laughing. It was exactly the kind of nonsense I expected. For the first few minutes, nothing happens. The planchette just sits there, completely still, and we're all smirking at each other. Honestly, I was about ready to call it a bust and go back to watching some videos when, no joke, the thing actually moves. And no, I'm not saying it jerked violently, or did some Hollywood-style spin across the board. It was slow, so slow that at first I thought Eric was messing with us. But then I realized his fingers were just as light on the planchette as mine. In fact, nobody looked like they were pushing it. It slid over to the letter Y. We all kind of exchanged nervous glances, but no one said anything. I could feel the energy in the room shift a little, like it was still all fun and games, but now there was this undercurrent of, what if this isn't a joke? Eric, though, being Eric, just kept going. "What's your name?" he asked, half laughing, half serious now. The planchette moved again, this time faster. It spelled out A-R-I-N. Aaron. None of us knew anyone by that name. That's when I started to get that sinking feeling in my stomach, the one you get when you realize maybe you've gone too far. Maybe we'd asked the wrong question. But Eric, still grinning like this was the best night ever, kept on. "Aaron, are you a good spirit?" The planchette hovered for a second, then slid over to N-O. Just like that. And let me tell you, the laughter stopped real quick. You could feel the tension in the room go from 0 to 100. No one was laughing anymore. Eric, trying to keep things light, asked, "Should we stop?" The planchette immediately shot to NO again, way faster than before. It was almost like whatever we were talking to didn't want us to leave. My hand was sweating, and I was honestly ready to just lift my fingers off the damn thing and call it a night. But before I could, the planchette moved again, on its own this time. It spelled out L-O-O-K. Look where?" Eric asked, his voice a little shakier now. The planchette spelled out DOOR. We all froze. My apartment door was directly in front of us, across the room, and I swear I didn't even want to turn around. It was like I already knew what was coming, but I couldn't stop myself from looking. My heart was pounding, and all the jokes were gone now. It felt too real. Of course, there was nothing there. The door was closed, no sounds, no shadows, just a door. But we were all looking at it, waiting for, I don't even know what. I told myself it was just coincidence. We probably pushed the planchette without realizing it. All right, that's enough, I said, trying to sound casual. Let's call it quits before we freak ourselves out. Everyone agreed, and we moved the planchette to goodbye, which, if you know anything about Ouija boards, is supposed to close the session. As soon as we did, the candles flickered out, both of them at the same time. It could have been a draft, right? That's what I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just done something really, really stupid. We cleaned up the board, threw on some Netflix, and pretended like everything was fine. But I could tell none of us were really into it anymore. The fun, the excitement, it was gone. I think we all felt it, that weird heaviness in the air. After a couple of hours, everyone started heading home, and by midnight, the apartment was empty. I was left alone. That's when I heard the knock at my door. I stared at the door for a solid 5 seconds before I even registered what had just happened. I mean, no one ever comes to my apartment that late. Midnight? Seriously? That's the kind of thing you only see in horror movies, right? I got up, slowly, like my legs didn't want to move. My brain was running in circles trying to rationalize what was going on. Maybe one of my friends forgot something and came back. Maybe a neighbor needed something. But the weirdest part was how silent the knock had been. It wasn't the loud, impatient kind of knock you'd expect from someone looking for attention. It was soft, almost polite. A single tap, just enough to be heard. Like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side didn't want to scare me. But the effect was exactly the opposite. I made my way to the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. My apartment was dead quiet, which made every little noise feel amplified. My breathing, my footsteps, even the creak of the floorboards under my weight. I reached for the doorknob and stopped. My hand was hovering over it, shaking a little. I don't know why, but in that moment I couldn't bring myself to open it. It didn't feel right. Nothing about this felt right. Another knock. This time, a little louder. I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. But I was already on edge, and I knew I probably sounded freaked out. Silence. Just the sound of my own voice hanging in the air, with no answer from the other side. Now, at this point, most people would have just opened the door, right? That's the normal thing to do. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it. It's like that gut feeling you get when you know something bad is about to happen, but you can't quite put your finger on why. I leaned closer to the door, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No rustling. No sign that anyone was actually out there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was waiting for me. And then I heard it. A whisper. It was so faint I thought maybe I was imagining it at first. But I pressed my ear against the door, and there it was again. A soft, breathy voice. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it didn't sound right. It didn't sound like someone talking. It was like a hiss, like air leaking out of something. Slow, steady, and unsettling as hell. I backed away from the door, fast. My phone was sitting on the coffee table, and I rushed over to grab it, my hands shaking as I unlocked the screen. I opened the camera app and switched to the front-facing camera, using it like a mirror to see the door from a distance. I know, it sounds dumb, but I didn't want to get too close to the door again. I aimed the camera at the peephole, zooming in to see if anyone was outside. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty, or at least, that's what it looked like. I zoomed in further, squinting at the screen. That's when I noticed something weird, something that made my skin crawl. There was a shadow near the bottom of the door, just barely visible in the frame. It wasn't a person. It didn't have the shape of feet, or legs, or anything normal. It was just there. A blotch of darkness that shouldn't have been there, like the light in the hallway was bending around something that wasn't supposed to exist. I dropped my phone. The whispering started again, louder this time, like it was right on the other side of the door. I could feel it, this intense, suffocating pressure, like the air in the room had thickened. I backed up until I hit the wall, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them making any sense. Every part of me was screaming not to open that door. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring, waiting for something to happen, for the shadow to move, for the knocking to start again, for anything. But nothing came, just that low whisper, rising and falling, like it was waiting for me to make the first move. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed my phone again, my hands still shaking, and started texting Eric. I know. He wouldn't have been any help, but I needed to tell someone what was going on. As soon as I started typing, though, the whispering stopped. Dead silence, like someone had hit pause on the whole thing. For a second, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe it had just been a weird coincidence, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I even let out a nervous laugh, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. That's when the knock came again. Harder this time. Louder. Like someone was banging on the door with their fists. I jumped back, dropping my phone again. This time, I didn't wait around. I bolted into my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty, and I could barely catch my breath. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up in the corner of my room, listening to the silence. The knocking had stopped, but I couldn't bring myself to go back to the door. I just sat there, staring at my bedroom door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. My mind was going crazy with possibilities. Was it really the Ouija board? Could it have triggered something? Or was it just some creep messing with me? Maybe someone saw us playing and thought it'd be funny to freak me out. That's what I told myself, at least. But deep down, I knew. I knew it wasn't just some prank. There was something else going on, something that didn't want me to feel safe. I don't know how long I stayed in my room that night. I think I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the floor. It was morning. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to see, I don't even know what, but the apartment was quiet. The door was still locked. Everything was exactly where I had left it, except for one thing. When I walked to the front door, there was something on the floor right in front of it. A piece of paper, folded neatly in half. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. There were only 3 words written on it, in shaky, uneven handwriting. I'm still here. The paper shook in my hands, the words staring back at me like a challenge. I read them over and over again, trying to make sense of it. I'm still here. But who was I? And why the hell were they still here? My first instinct was to get out of the apartment. Just leave, forget everything, and pretend none of this had happened. But the moment I looked at the front door, I froze. There was this overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. That same suffocating pressure from the night before was back, like someone was standing just inches away from me, watching. I backed away from the door, my breath quickening. Every inch of my body was telling me that opening it wasn't an option. I felt trapped. If I left, I didn't know what, or who, I'd run into. But staying in the apartment didn't feel any better. I scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. The paper was the only thing that had changed. No signs of a break-in, no windows left open, no sounds from the hallway. Yet somehow, someone had left that note. Someone had been in my apartment. I grabbed my phone off the floor. Eric had texted me back, probably hours ago, but I'd been too freaked out to check. His messages were mostly just random late-night stuff. Yo, you good? Bro, stop playing. Did the board actually freak you out? Man, you ghosted us. Come on, it's a joke, right? I stared at his last message. You alive? The irony of it wasn't lost on me. I texted him back, fingers flying across the screen. Dude, something's wrong. Come over. Now. I waited for what felt like forever. Nothing. I sent another message, then another. Finally, after a solid 5 minutes of radio silence, I gave up. I was on my own. Sitting there, I started to feel this creeping sense of paranoia. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, listening for anything out of the ordinary. Every creak, every small noise sent chills down my spine. The air in the apartment felt thicker, heavier, like something unseen was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. And that's when I remembered the security camera. I have one of those cheap Wi-Fi cameras I set up in my living room ages ago. I usually use it when I'm out of town, just to keep an eye on things, but I'd totally forgotten about it. I opened the app on my phone, praying that it had caught something, anything, that could explain what was going on. I scrubbed through the footage from the night before. It was just a few hours of us messing around with the Ouija board, laughing, and acting like idiots. Everything seemed normal, but then I got to the part where the candles went out. The camera caught it perfectly. The flames flickered, dimmed, and then snuffed out completely, just like that. But that wasn't the weird part. Right after the candles went out, the camera glitched. The screen fuzzed for a second, just long enough to miss something. When the footage came back, the board was still in the center of the room, but we were all sitting there completely silent. It was like we'd frozen for a few seconds, all of us staring at the board like we were waiting for something to happen. And then the planchette moved, on its own. None of us were touching it. It slid across the board in a perfect arc, spelling out something. The footage was grainy, but I could just make out the letters LOOK. I paused the video, my stomach churning. That's when the knocking had started, but the camera hadn't caught it. The screen went dark for about 10 minutes after that, and when it came back, we were already saying goodbye to each other, cleaning up, like nothing had happened. No sign of the knocking. No sign of the shadow I'd seen by the door. I replayed the footage again, trying to catch any detail I might have missed. And that's when I saw it. At the very edge of the frame, just before the camera glitched, something flickered by the door. It was small, barely noticeable, a shape, dark and blurry, like a figure standing just outside the entrance to the apartment. But it wasn't solid. It was like a shadow, but not cast by anything. It was there, and then it was gone. My heart was racing now. I knew I wasn't imagining this. Something had been there. Something had been watching us. I shut off the app, feeling that same cold dread creeping up my spine. Whatever had been at my door last night hadn't left. It was still around. The note hadn't been a warning. It had been a promise. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that made sense. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, ready to leave the apartment. But when I reached for the doorknob, something stopped me. Not a sound or a knock this time, just a feeling, a presence. I could feel it, standing just on the other side of the door. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I didn't need to open the door. It was there, waiting. I could almost feel the weight of its stare, like a pair of eyes burning through the wood, watching me, waiting for me to turn the knob. I backed away, slowly, my skin crawling. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to open that door. I needed to get out, but I couldn't. I didn't even feel safe moving anymore, like if I made a sound, Whatever was on the other side would know I was still here. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. It was Eric, finally responding. "Dude, chill. I'll come by after work. It's all in your head. We were just messing around with the board." I stared at the message, feeling this weird mix of frustration and terror. He didn't get it. No one would believe me. This wasn't in my head. It was real. I could feel it. I turned back to the door, and for the first time, I noticed something else. Just beneath the crack at the bottom, there was a shadow. Thin, stretched out, like something standing right up against the door, blocking the light from the hallway. And then, before I could react, the handle turned. Slowly. It didn't open all the way, just enough for me to see that tiny, impossible gap between the door and the frame. Just enough for the darkness on the other side to spill into my apartment. I stumbled backward, heart in my throat, as the door creaked open a little wider. My breath hitched in my chest, and I felt the pressure around me tighten, like something was about to pull me in. But before it could, the door slammed shut. Hard. So hard, the sound echoed through the entire apartment. The shadow beneath the door disappeared, just like that. I stood there frozen, waiting for the knocking to start again, for the whispering, for anything. But all I got was silence. That was worse. The silence after the door slammed shut was unbearable. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to move, my mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. It was that same gnawing feeling, the one I couldn't shake, that I was no longer in control of my own space. The apartment, which had once been this safe, boring place, now felt like a trap, a cage. And whatever was outside, or maybe inside, was waiting for me to let my guard down. I wanted to call someone. Eric, the police, anyone. But every time I thought about picking up my phone, I couldn't bring myself to do it. What was I even going to say? "Hi, I think a ghost, or something worse, is in my apartment." Yeah, no way they'd believe me. I could already imagine the dispatcher rolling their eyes and sending an officer out to do a wellness check, only for them to show up and find nothing. And then what? I'd be left alone with whatever was watching me. I had to figure this out myself. I started pacing the apartment, my mind on overdrive, trying to think of any explanation that made sense. The note, the knocking, the shadow, it was all too connected to the Ouija board. That stupid board. I couldn't help but wonder if we'd unleashed something. Like one of those stories you hear about people opening doors they're not supposed to. But this didn't feel like a spirit or a ghost. It felt more real, like something physical was involved. Something that could touch or move or harm. I glanced at the front door again. The hallway outside was still silent. No more knocks, no whispers. But I knew better than to think it was over. I couldn't stay here, that much was clear. Whatever it was, it wanted something from me. But I wasn't going to wait around to find out what. So I did something I hadn't even thought of before. I grabbed the Ouija board from the shelf where we'd tossed it the night before. I didn't want to touch it, but I figured if this thing had started the whole mess, maybe it could help me end it. Stupid logic, maybe. But I was out of options. I sat down in the middle of the living room, facing the door, and placed the board in front of me. The candles from the night before were still there, melted down to nubs. I lit them again, more for comfort than anything else, and set the planchette in the center of the board. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to place my fingers lightly on the edge, just like we'd done the night before. This time, I didn't wait for Eric or anyone else to take the lead. I whispered the question myself. "Who's there?" At first, nothing happened. The candles flickered a little, but that could have been the draft from the window. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting the planchette to move on its own like it had in the video. But it didn't. I asked again, louder this time. "Who's there?" Still nothing. The room was heavy with silence. The kind of silence that presses on your ears, and makes you feel like you're underwater. I kept my fingers on the planchette, resisting the urge to lift them and walk away. My mind was racing, and I was about to give up when I felt it. Not a movement exactly, more like a tug, a pull from beneath my fingertips. It was subtle, like the tiniest vibration, but it was enough to get my heart racing again. I froze, holding my breath, watching as the planchette slowly, very slowly, inched its way toward a letter. It stopped on H, then it moved again. This time, faster. Oh, the planchette was gliding smoothly now, like it had a mind of its own. M. E. I let out a shaky breath, my throat dry. Home. That's what it had spelled. Home. I didn't know what that meant, but before I could think too much about it, the planchette moved again. W. A. T. C. H. My entire body went cold. Home. Watch. Was it telling me to stay home, to watch for something? Or was it saying that something was already watching me? As soon as the last letter was spelled out, the candles flickered wildly, almost going out. I pulled my hands away from the board, heart hammering in my chest. The air felt electric, like the whole room was charged with something invisible. I stood up, backing away from the board, unsure of what I'd just done. And that's when the doorbell rang. Not a knock this time. The doorbell. Clear, loud, and way too normal for everything that had just happened. I froze. Who rings the doorbell in the middle of all this? I mean, after the creepy knocks and whispers, it felt completely out of place. But it was also more terrifying because of how normal it was. Like, who or what would show up now, after everything that had happened? I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. And then, just like before, the doorbell rang again. Twice. Quickly. No way was I opening that door. Not after everything I'd been through. But my curiosity was eating me alive. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera app again. With shaky hands, I aimed it at the door, zooming in on the peephole. The hallway was completely still. There was no one there. Just the same empty corridor, stretching out into the dim light of the building. But then I saw it. A shadow. Thin and barely noticeable. Just like before. Only this time, it wasn't by the bottom of the door. It was higher, like it was standing up, right in front of the peephole, just out of sight. My breath hitched in my throat. I stepped back from the door, my phone still in my hand. My heart was racing, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. The shadow didn't move. It just stayed there, waiting. And then, the doorbell rang again. I swallowed hard, backing further away. Whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't human. I knew that now. The knocking, the whispers, the shadow. This thing had been trying to get inside all night, and now it was right there, inches away, separated from me by nothing but a flimsy wooden door. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't leave either. The thought of opening the door, of coming face to face with whatever was on the other side, was too much. That's when my phone buzzed again. Another message from Eric. Yo, dude, I just got off work. You good? I stared at the message, my mind racing. I wanted to tell him to hurry, to come help me, but I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to risk letting that thing in. My fingers hovered over the screen, typing out a reply when the doorknob turned. It was so slow, so deliberate, like it was taunting me, daring me to make a move. I watched, horrified, as the knob twisted, clicked, and the door creaked open just an inch. Just enough for me to see it. A face, pale, eyes too large, too dark, a smile that stretched too wide, like it had been carved into the skin. And then, in a voice that sent chills straight through me, it whispered, "I'm home." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. That face, that thing, was staring at me through the crack in the door, its eyes black and empty, the corners of its mouth twisted up in an unnatural, grotesque grin. It was like the skin on its face was too tight, stretched thin over something that wasn't quite human. The words it whispered, "I'm home," hung in the air, cold and taunting. The sound of its voice was wrong, like it was layered with something deeper, something older. It didn't feel like it was coming from its mouth, but from everywhere around me. My legs locked up, fear rooting me to the floor. My mind was screaming to run, to do anything but stand there, but my body wouldn't listen. It was like I was in a nightmare where everything moves in slow motion, and you can't escape no matter how hard you try. I could feel its eyes on me, even though they were black pits of nothing. They saw me. The door creaked open a little wider, and I snapped out of my frozen state. I didn't think, I just acted. I slammed the door shut with every ounce of strength I had, feeling the impact shudder through my hands and up my arms. The door rattled on its hinges, but it stayed shut. For a second, I just stood there, panting, heart hammering against my chest, my forehead pressed against the cool wood of the door. Then came the knocking again. But this time, it wasn't soft or polite. It was loud, insistent, like someone was banging their fists against the wood. Each knock sent vibrations through the door, through my bones, through my soul. It was a sound I could feel more than hear. My fingers gripped the doorknob tightly, trying to keep it from turning again. I didn't know if that would help, but I wasn't taking any chances. The knocking stopped abruptly, and for a moment there was silence again. But the air was thick with tension, like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something worse. I could feel it. That thing was still there, on the other side of the door, waiting for me to make a mistake. And then, just as I started to think I might have a chance to run, the whisper came again. But this time, it wasn't from the door. It was behind me. "I'm still here." I whipped around so fast I nearly lost my balance, my heart pounding in my throat. The room was empty. At least, it looked empty. But that didn't matter. The voice wasn't lying. It was still here. I could feel it, lurking just out of sight, pressing in from all sides. My phone buzzed in my hand, jolting me out of my panic. It was a message from Eric. "Bro, I'm outside your building. What floor are you on again?" I stared at the screen, my mind racing. He couldn't come up here. Whatever was in my apartment was dangerous, and if he came up, he'd be walking straight into it. I had to get out now, before it was too late. But there was no way I was opening that front door. I glanced toward the window. It was a stupid idea, I knew that, but I was desperate. I was on the 3rd floor, and while the drop wasn't exactly a short one, it wasn't impossible either. There was a fire escape just a few feet away. If I could get the window open, I might be able to climb out and make it down without killing myself. I ran to the window and yanked it open, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. The fire escape was right there, so close I could almost touch it. I swung one leg over the windowsill, my hands gripping the edge tightly, ready to haul myself out. And then I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. I turned, my blood running cold. The front door was opening again, this time on its own. No creak, no warning, just the slow, deliberate motion of the door swinging inward. And standing in the doorway, its pale face framed in shadow, was it, the thing that had been watching me. It stepped forward, one slow, deliberate movement at a time, its eyes never leaving mine. That twisted smile was still plastered on its face, but now, up close, I could see how wrong it was. The skin around its mouth was cracked, split, like it had been torn open from the inside. Its head tilted slightly, as if it was studying me, waiting for something. "I'm home," it whispered again, its voice barely audible, but the weight of it pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. I scrambled out the window, nearly slipping in my panic, but I caught myself on the edge of the fire escape. My hands were shaking so badly I almost lost my grip. I could hear it moving inside, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the room, getting closer to the window. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I saw its face again, I knew I wouldn't be able to move. So I focused on getting down, one shaky step at a time, feeling the cold metal of the fire escape bite into my skin. Every second felt like an eternity, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps as I climbed down. When I reached the bottom, I didn't stop. I bolted for the street, my heart pounding, every shadow feeling like it was watching me, following me. The street was empty, eerily quiet, and Eric's car was parked a little ways down. I ran to it, throwing myself against the passenger door and pounding on the window. Eric jumped, startled, and rolled it down, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Dude, what the hell? Drive!" I gasped, barely able to get the words out. "Just drive, now!" He didn't argue. One look at my face, and he knew something was seriously wrong. He floored it, pulling away from the curb, the tires screeching as we sped down the street. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We drove in silence for a while, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. Eric glanced over at me, clearly wanting to ask what had happened, but he didn't push. I was grateful for that. Eventually, we pulled over in front of an all-night diner, the neon lights flickering in the dark. Eric parked the car, and I leaned back in my seat, trying to calm my racing heart. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on?" he asked quietly, his voice careful, like he was afraid I might break. I stared out the window, my reflection staring back at me in the glass. I didn't know how to explain it to him. I didn't even know if I could explain it. Whatever had happened in that apartment, it wasn't over. I could feel it. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't just going to let me walk away. And then, as if to confirm my worst fears, my phone buzzed again. A new message, from an unknown number. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see, but I couldn't stop myself. There were only 2 words, "Still watching." The Ouija board said, "Look under the floorboards." I found something that shouldn't be there. I know. The title sounds like one of those cheesy horror stories your friend tells you around a campfire. But I swear, this really happened, and I can't get it out of my head. I never believed in the paranormal. Like, at all. I was the guy who laughed at horror movies and thought Ouija boards were nothing more than glorified cardboard. Until last month, when everything changed. Let me start from the beginning. A few weeks ago, I was hanging out with some old friends from high school. It was one of those lazy Saturday nights where nothing seemed interesting enough to do. We ended up at my buddy Mark's place. It's this old house his grandparents left him, and let me tell you, this place feels like it has a history. Creaky floors, drafty windows, and that weird smell of, I don't know, like dust and something stale. I never thought much of it, but that night, the house felt different. Anyway, we were all pretty bored. Someone suggested watching a movie, but we had already binged through everything worth watching. Mark, being the adventurous type, casually suggested we play with a Ouija board he found in his attic. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would you ever touch a Ouija board? And trust me, if I had any idea what was about to happen, I wouldn't have gone near it. But in that moment, it was just a game to me. A joke, really. The board itself looked ancient, like the kind you'd find in a dusty corner of a thrift store. The letters and numbers were worn, and the wood had that weathered look like it had been handled for years. Mark swore it was probably just a cheap knockoff his grandparents bought ages ago, but there was something about it that felt off. We dimmed the lights, because why not? Mark grabbed some candles for ambience, classic Mark, and we all sat in a circle around the board. There were 4 of us, me, Mark, his girlfriend Sarah, and our other friend Jake. None of us took it seriously at first. We were just messing around, asking dumb questions like, is Mark ever going to find a real job? Or, is Jake going to die alone? Dumb stuff like that. But then, something shifted. I asked, is there anyone here with us? The planchette didn't move at first, and we all kind of laughed it off. But then, without any of us touching it, it slid slowly to yes. We all froze. I remember looking around, expecting someone to start laughing, but everyone's faces were serious. Jake, the biggest skeptic of us all, was the first to break the silence. "Okay, who's messing with me?" he asked, glancing suspiciously at Mark. But Mark looked just as confused as the rest of us. We asked a few more questions, and the answers we got were weird. They didn't make sense. Random letters that didn't form real words, numbers that seemed to mean nothing. But then I asked, "What do you want?" The planchette moved again, this time more quickly, sliding over the letters with a sort of urgency. It spelled out LOOKUNDER. Look under. We stared at the board, confused. "Look under what?" I asked, my voice coming out shakier than I intended. And then the planchette moved once more. This time, it spelled out FLOORBOARDS. Look under the floorboards. At that point, Sarah was done. She pulled her hands away from the planchette and stood up. "Nope, not happening. I don't like this." She blew out one of the candles, clearly freaked out, but the rest of us were too intrigued to stop. There was no way this could be real, right? Mark and I exchanged a glance, both of us thinking the same thing. His house was old, and the floorboards creaked whenever you so much as breathed. It wasn't crazy to think that something might be hidden under them. Maybe some old stash of cash, or some weird family heirloom his grandparents forgot about. "Let's check it out," Mark said, his voice filled with this weird mix of excitement and hesitation. Jake looked at him like he was insane, but I'll be honest, I was curious too. So we grabbed a flashlight and made our way to the living room, where the floor seemed the most worn, I guess. The boards there had this slight gap between them, like they'd been pried up at some point. Mark got a screwdriver and started working on the edges of one of the boards. After a few minutes of struggling, he finally managed to pry it loose. There was just darkness underneath. We pulled up a few more boards, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just dirt, but as we shined the flashlight into the hole, we realized it was something else, something old and wrapped in cloth. It was like a small dirty bundle tied together with twine. I hesitated. "Should we open it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark, ever the brave one, reached in and pulled it out. The cloth felt brittle, like it would fall apart if you handled it too roughly. Slowly, carefully, Mark started unwrapping it. What we found inside. I still get chills just thinking about it. Mark's hands shook as he untied the twine. The bundle was small, probably about the size of a shoebox, but the cloth was so old and filthy that I half expected it to turn to dust in his hands. Every time he pulled on a corner, the fabric made this awful scraping sound, like nails on a chalkboard. It didn't help that the room was dead silent, except for our breathing. When he finally got it open, the first thing we saw was hair. Long, matted and dark. It stuck out from between the layers of cloth like it had been packed in too tight. My heart skipped a beat. "Is that—" I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah, who had been standing by the door, refused to come any closer. No way, this is messed up, this is seriously messed up." Mark didn't say anything. He just kept unwrapping the bundle, slowly revealing what was inside. Underneath the hair was a doll, but not the kind of doll you'd expect. It looked homemade, like someone had stitched it together by hand. The body was made of what I could only describe as burlap, sewn crudely with thick black thread. The face, God, the face. It was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just a rough stitched X where the mouth should have been. Something about it felt wrong, like it shouldn't exist. Jake leaned in closer, squinting at the doll. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" he asked, clearly freaked out but trying to hide it behind his usual skepticism. I didn't know what to say. My brain was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. but nothing made sense. Who the hell put something like this under their floorboards, and why? Mark sat back on his heels, staring at the doll like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "This isn't some weird family heirloom," he said quietly, mostly to himself. This is something else." Sarah finally lost it. She stormed out of the room, muttering about how we were all crazy and how she didn't want anything to do with whatever was happening. But the rest of us, we were glued to the spot. Something about the whole situation kept us there, like we were in too deep to just walk away. That's when things got worse. Jake, being the genius he is, reached out and touched the doll's face, his fingers brushing against the rough burlap. The second he did, the room temperature dropped. I'm not exaggerating. It was like someone cranked the AC up to max in the middle of November. I could see my breath hanging in the air. "Did anyone else feel that?" I asked, my voice shaky. Mark nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "Dude, what the hell?" We all backed up, staring at the doll, like it was some sort of cursed object, which, looking back now, it probably was. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. There was a tension in the room, something electric, like the moments before a lightning strike. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. And then the room plunged into darkness. My heart was pounding in my ears. For a second, no one moved. We just stood there, frozen, trying to process what the hell was happening. Then, out of the blackness, I heard something that I will never forget for as long as I live. A whisper, but not a normal whisper. It sounded like it was right next to my ear, so close I could feel the breath on my neck. "Don't look!" I jumped back, slamming into the wall behind me, my mind racing. "Did you guys hear that?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Jake fumbled for his phone, using the flashlight to cut through the darkness. He swept the light over the room, and for a second, I thought I saw something move in the corner. Just a shadow, quick and slinking, like it was trying to avoid the light. But then it was gone. Nope. 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 Mark was already grabbing the boards and trying to cover up the hole. "We're done. This is done. Whatever this is, I don't want any part of it." Jake, still shining his phone around, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, man, this is too much. We gotta put this thing back, right now." I couldn't argue. Whatever we had found, whatever we had done, it wasn't worth sticking around for. Mark tossed the doll back into the hole like it was burning his hands, and I helped him shove the floorboards back into place as fast as we could. My hands were trembling so much I could barely grip the screwdriver. Once we had everything covered up again, we all stood there in silence, staring at the spot where the boards didn't quite fit back together. The room was still freezing, and every sound felt magnified. The creak of the floor under our feet, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room. We didn't speak for a while. What could we say? None of us knew what we'd just experienced. Sarah came back into the room eventually, looking pale but calmer than before. "You guys finished with your little ghost hunt?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm, but I could tell she was still freaked out. Mark tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced. Yeah, we're done. Let's just, I don't know, watch a movie or something. Forget this." But I couldn't forget it, not yet. As we settled back into the living room, trying to pretend like nothing had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that whatever we had disturbed under the floorboards was still there, watching us. And then, about an hour later, just as we were about to leave, I got a text from an unknown number. "Look again." I stared at my phone, my heart doing somersaults in my chest. The message blinked back at me in that same eerie simplicity. "Look again." I didn't recognize the number. No contact info, no profile pic, nothing. Just a string of numbers that meant absolutely nothing to me. And yet, the message sent a cold wave of fear washing over me. Guys," I said, holding up my phone for the others to see. Mark leaned in, squinting at the screen, "Who the hell is that from?" he asked, already sounding annoyed. "I don't know," I replied, but my voice was shaky. "It's an unknown number. This just showed up." Jake snatched the phone from my hand, scrolling through the message as if he expected to find some kind of clue in the text itself. But there was nothing, just two simple words. "Look again." "Weird," he muttered, handing the phone back. "Probably a prank or some kind of spam. You know how those bots get your number somehow." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. It couldn't be. It was too specific, too perfectly timed. "I don't like this," Sarah muttered, pacing back and forth near the door. She was biting her nails, something she only did when she was seriously anxious. "I really don't like this." For a moment, none of us said anything. We all just sat there, letting the weight of the situation sink in. That text felt like a threat, like someone, or something, knew exactly what we had done and wasn't happy about it. But as creepy as the message was, what scared me more was the timing. How did anyone know what we were doing? We hadn't told anyone about the doll or the floorboards or anything that had happened in the last couple of hours. But somehow, someone did. Mark broke the silence first. "All right, look, this is probably just a coincidence," he said, rubbing his hands over his face. "Let's not freak out over some dumb text. There's no way this is real." "Coincidence?" I said, my voice rising a little. "Dude, this isn't just some random spam message. It literally says, 'Look again,' like at the floorboards. That's not something that just happens." Jake snorted, but it wasn't out of humor, more like disbelief. "Yeah, well, I'm not looking at anything ever again in this house. I'm done. I'm so done with this." For a moment, I thought Mark was going to argue, maybe try to convince us to check under the floorboards again, but instead, he stood up, pacing back and forth like he was trying to burn off the nervous energy. "I mean, do we really want to look again?" he asked, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like that's just asking for trouble. Whatever we found, maybe it's better if we just leave it alone. Forget it ever happened." "I agree," Sarah said quickly. "We're messing with something we don't understand. We shouldn't have touched it in the first place." I wanted to agree. I really did. But something in the pit of my stomach was gnawing at me. That text was still sitting there on my phone, a glaring reminder that maybe, just maybe, we'd opened a door that couldn't be closed. Ignoring it wasn't going to change that. Then, something else happened that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There was a knock. At first, it was so soft that I thought I had imagined it. But then it came again. A slow, deliberate knock at the front door. Mark froze in mid-step. Jake's eyes darted to the entrance like he was waiting for a jump scare in a horror movie. Sarah backed up against the wall, her face drained of all colour. No one moved. The knock came again, louder this time. 3 slow, evenly spaced thuds that seemed to vibrate through the walls. My breath caught in my throat. Who the hell could that be?" Jake whispered. "I'm not answering that," Mark said, shaking his head. We all just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. The knocking had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. It felt like the air in the room had thickened, like we were being watched by something just outside our line of sight. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to speak. "Maybe it's just a delivery guy or something," I said, though I didn't believe it. Not at all. Jake, trying to keep it together, took a step toward the door, grabbing a nearby baseball bat, classic Jake move, like it would actually do anything against whatever was waiting for us. He moved slowly, cautiously, until he was standing right in front of the door. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. No response, just more silence. Jake's hand hovered over the doorknob. I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. For a second, I thought he wasn't going to do it, that he would just back away. but Jake's always been the impulsive one. Without any warning, he threw open the door. There was no one there. The porch was empty. The street outside was quiet, just the usual suburban cul-de-sac, lit by a couple of dim streetlights. No cars, no people, just nothing. Jake stepped out onto the porch, looking around like he expected someone to jump out of the bushes, but there was no one. He turned back to us, holding his hands up in confusion. "What the hell? There's nobody here." Mark walked up behind him, glancing around the porch before shaking his head. "Great. So now we've got ghosts knocking on doors. Perfect." He slammed the door shut, locking it for good measure, even though deep down we all knew that wasn't going to stop whatever was happening. We regrouped in the living room, but no one could shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something or someone was still watching us. And then, just as we were trying to figure out what to do next, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Same unknown number. "You shouldn't have buried it." I felt a chill run down my spine. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I read the text aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake shook his head, looking more scared than I'd ever seen him. "Okay, this is getting out of hand. What do they mean by that? We didn't bury anything." Mark, his face pale, sat down heavily on the couch. "No," he said slowly. "But we covered it up, didn't we? We put the floorboards back. It's the same thing." I looked down at my phone, my hands trembling. Whoever or whatever was texting me knew exactly what we had done, and they weren't happy about it. Then the lights flickered again, and this time I heard something move, not outside, not near the door, under the floorboards. The sound coming from under the floor was subtle at first, almost like something shifting, dragging itself along the wooden beams. At first, none of us said anything. We were all too scared to acknowledge it, hoping it was just the house settling. But as the seconds ticked by, it became undeniable. There was something down there, moving. I stood frozen, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling as the noise grew louder. It was a slow, deliberate scratching, like nails against wood, moving in short bursts. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Sarah was the first to speak. "What the hell is that?" No one answered. What could we say? Mark's eyes were wide, and Jake, who always tried to be the tough guy, looked like he was about to bolt for the door. His hand gripped the bat so tightly his knuckles had turned white. We stood there, listening to that horrible sound, trying to make sense of it. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't even need to look at it to know what it said. I already felt it in my bones. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice shaking. We should check it out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you insane? After everything that's happened, you want to go back under the floorboards?" "We don't have a choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever's down there, it's not going to stop. You heard the text. We shouldn't have covered it up." Jake glared at him like he was about to protest, but the scratching grew louder, more insistent. It was like whatever was under the floor knew we were standing right above it. It was waiting. "Fine," Jake muttered. "Let's just get this over with." Reluctantly, we all moved back to the spot where we had pulled up the floorboards earlier. The room was cold again, that same suffocating chill that made every breath feel like it was freezing in my lungs. The boards creaked under our feet as we stood there, staring down at the spot where we had buried the doll. Mark grabbed the screwdriver, his hand shaking as he started to pry up the boards again. The second the first board came loose, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was so intense, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Do you think it's gone?" Mark didn't answer. He kept working, pulling up the boards one by one, until the hole was exposed again. We all peered into the darkness, but this time, something was different. The bundle was still there, but the cloth wasn't as tightly wrapped as before. It looked disturbed, as if something had been moving inside of it. Jake gagged a little. Man, I don't like this at all. Mark knelt down, shining the flashlight into the hole. We have to see, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt sick. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to leave, to get the hell out of there and never look back. But I couldn't move. I was glued to the spot, watching as Mark reached into the hole and grabbed the cloth bundle again. As soon as he touched it, the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped even lower, and for a brief moment, I thought I could see my breath in the air. Mark unwrapped the bundle, his hands trembling. When the last layer of cloth fell away, we all recoiled. It wasn't just a doll anymore. The hair, which had looked matted and dirty before, was now slick and wet, as if it had been dipped in something. The burlap body had darkened, stained with a deep reddish-brown colour that made my stomach churn, and the face, the X stitched where the mouth should have been, was unravelling. The threads were loose, hanging like tiny ropes. What the hell? Jake muttered, backing away. That wasn't like that before. It wasn't. We all took a step back, too horrified to touch it. The doll looked alive, like something had been done to it while it was under the floor, something we couldn't understand. And then the lights flickered again. But this time, they didn't come back on. We were plunged into darkness, and I felt the panic rising in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight, and the beam cut through the black, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Mark did the same, his light shaky as he pointed it at the doll. And that's when I saw it. Movement. The doll's head turned. I swear on everything I hold dear, the damn thing moved. It was subtle at first, just a slight twitch of the head, but then the whole body jerked like it was trying to get up. The hair moved, shifting as if something was breathing beneath it. We all stumbled back, horrified. "Get rid of it!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with fear. "Get it out of here, now!" Mark didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed the doll by the arm, and as soon as he did, the lights flickered back on. But instead of relief, it brought something far worse. The shadows in the room weren't where they should have been. They moved unnaturally, stretching along the walls like they had a life of their own. The room was freezing now, so cold that I could feel the frost on the tips of my fingers. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something shift in the far corner of the room. It was a figure. At first it was barely visible, just a dark mass against the wall. But as I stared, it started to take shape, tall, lanky, and bent in ways a human body shouldn't bend. Its arms were too long, its fingers dragging on the floor, and its face was blank, just like the doll. It stood there, watching us. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The thing just stood there, motionless, like it was waiting for us to make a mistake. Mark was the first to snap out of it. He grabbed the doll and bolted for the door, shouting at the rest of us to follow. But as we ran, I heard the scraping noise again. Louder now, more frantic, like something was being dragged across the floor behind us. We didn't look back. None of us did. We raced through the house, our footsteps pounding against the hardwood as we sprinted for the front door. Mark yanked it open, and we all stumbled out into the night, gasping for air. Once we were outside, the noise stopped. The cold disappeared. But none of us felt safe. Mark was still holding the doll, his hands shaking. "We need to burn this thing," he said, his voice shaky. Jake nodded. "Yeah, man. I don't care what we do with it as long as it's far away from me." We made a fire in Mark's backyard, using old wood and whatever else we could find. The flames licked at the air as we tossed the doll into the fire, watching as the flames consumed it. The burlap sizzled and cracked, the hair curling up in the heat, until all that was left was ash. None of us spoke for a long time. We just watched the fire burn, trying to convince ourselves that it was over, that whatever had happened in that house was gone. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And then, as the fire died down to embers, my phone buzzed one last time. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. My hands shook as I pulled it out of my pocket. Another message. Same unknown number. You can't burn what's already buried. The glow from the fire was fading, casting long shadows across Mark's yard. We all stood there, silent, watching the last of the ashes drift up into the night sky. I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to believe that burning the doll had put an end to whatever we'd unleashed. But that message, that last chilling text, had shattered any hope of that. You can't burn what's already buried. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. The words didn't make sense. We had burned it. We saw it turn to ash. But something deep in my gut told me it wasn't that simple. This wasn't over. Not even close. Mark must have noticed the look on my face. What is it now? He asked, his voice rough, like he already knew it was bad news. I handed him the phone, unable to say anything. His eyes scanned the message, and I saw his face go pale. For a moment, no one moved. We just stood there, the cold night air biting at our skin, the silence stretching longer than it should have. Sarah was the first to break. We have to go, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We need to leave. Right now. No. Mark's voice was firmer than I expected, but I could hear the fear lurking beneath it. We can't just run from this. Whatever this is, it's not going to let us go. Jake, still gripping the baseball bat he'd grabbed earlier, shook his head. Dude, we burned it. We destroyed the doll. What more can we do? But I knew the answer. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a gnawing certainty that wouldn't go away. The doll wasn't the source. It never was. We hadn't burned what was buried, because we hadn't found what was buried. I swallowed hard, the realization sinking in like a stone. The floorboards, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The doll. It was just a warning. There's something else down there. Something we didn't see. Mark stared at me, eyes wide. You think there's more? I nodded. I don't know what, but the scratching, the knocking, it didn't stop when we found the doll. There's something else under the floor. Sarah shook her head violently. No way. I'm not going back in there. But we didn't have a choice. The thing under the floorboards wasn't going to stop. We could feel it, all of us. That eerie sense that we were being watched. That whatever we had disturbed wasn't done with us yet. Against every survival instinct I had, I found myself walking back toward the house. My legs felt like lead, every step heavier than the last. I could hear the others following behind me, none of us saying a word. The house loomed in front of us, darker now, like it was holding its breath, waiting. The door creaked open with a sound that made my skin crawl. The inside of the house was even colder than it had been before. The air was thick, oppressive, like something was pressing down on us from all sides. We moved quietly, our footsteps muffled by the heavy silence, until we reached the living room. The floorboards. They looked the same as before, but there was something different. The gap between them seemed wider now, like they had been pried apart from below. My hands shook as I knelt down, reaching for the nearest board. Wait, Mark said suddenly, grabbing my arm. Are you sure about this? I wasn't sure about anything, but I knew we couldn't leave without knowing what was down there, without knowing what had been buried beneath the floor all this time. I pried up the first board, and the familiar smell of damp earth hit my nose. But this time, the hole seemed deeper. The flashlight's beam barely reached the bottom. I pulled up more boards, my heart pounding in my chest, until the hole was wide enough for all of us to see. The bundle we had burned was gone, but something else was there. A hand, not a doll's hand, a human one, pale, withered, and curled into a fist. It was sticking up out of the dirt, the skin stretched tight over the bones, like it had been buried there for a long, long time. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Jake stumbled back, almost tripping over his own feet. Mark just stood there, staring down at the hand, his face ashen. What the hell? Jake muttered, his voice trembling. I reached for the flashlight, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The beam flickered as I shone it down into the hole, illuminating more of the gruesome scene. There was an entire body beneath the floorboards, partially unearthed, the pale skin clinging to bones like wax stretched too thin. The clothes were old, tattered, barely more than rags. But the worst part was the face. It was blank. Just like the doll, there were no eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just smooth, stretched skin where a face should have been. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. None of this made sense. The doll, the messages, the body. How was any of this possible? Mark was breathing heavily, his eyes locked on the body. We buried it, he whispered, more to himself than to any of us. It was never the doll. It was this. Suddenly, the scratching noise returned, louder now, coming from all around us. It wasn't coming from under the floor anymore. It was coming from the walls, the ceiling, the very structure of the house itself. And then the whispers started. Soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second, overlapping, coming from every direction. You shouldn't have found it. You shouldn't have looked. It's yours now. The lights flickered violently, plunging us into a strobe of darkness and light. The shadows on the walls twisted and warped, stretching into grotesque shapes, like they were trying to pull free from the house itself. Mark screamed, dropping the flashlight as he backed away from the hole. "We need to get out of here," he yelled, panic in his voice. But I couldn't move. My eyes were glued to the body, to the pale, featureless face, staring up at me from the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "It's yours now." Suddenly the floor beneath me shifted, the boards groaning as if they were about to collapse. The hand, the withered, pale hand, began to move. Its fingers twitched, then flexed, curling into a fist before slowly reaching up toward me. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. The thing was waking up, pulling itself out of the earth beneath the house, its blank face turning toward me, as if it could see me without eyes. "We need to go, now!" Jake yelled, grabbing my arm and dragging me away from the hole. We all bolted for the door, not stopping until we were outside, gasping for air. Behind us, the house seemed to groan, the walls creaking as if the entire structure was alive, watching us leave. Once we were outside, we didn't look back. We got in our cars and drove, leaving Mark's house and whatever was buried under it far behind us. None of us spoke. What could we say? That was a week ago. I haven't been able to sleep since. And last night, I got another message. Same unknown number. "It's already buried, but it's not gone. You can't leave it." I haven't been back to Mark's house, but I know I'll have to go. Whatever we uncovered, it's not going to stop. It's waiting for me. We played with the Ouija board on a live stream. Something we contacted is haunting my viewers. Alright, so before I jump into this, I need to be clear. This started as a joke. I wasn't trying to freak anybody out or anything. My buddy Sam and I thought it'd be funny to do one of those spooky late-night streams. You know, the ones where YouTubers try dumb stuff like ghost hunting or exploring abandoned places. Except we're broke, so we figured we'd bring the paranormal to us. For context, I've been streaming on YouTube for a while now, mostly gaming content, some commentary stuff, and occasionally just chatting with the viewers. We've got this little tight-knit community, nothing huge, but loyal enough that we get a decent number of people showing up for every stream. It's a chill vibe. At least it was. One night, I had this idea to do something different for Halloween, something interactive, something that would give the chat something to freak out over. I don't even remember how the Ouija board came up, but once the idea was in my head, I was like, that's it, we'll stream using a Ouija board. You know, just for kicks. Sam was in, and honestly, it sounded like a good time. I figured we'd fake some spooky moments, play it up, and maybe get a few laughs. We even promoted it all week, calling it the Midnight Summoning Stream. I put together this cringy thumbnail with a stock image of a Ouija board and these cheesy green smoke effects around it. You know, classic clickbait. When the night finally came, I set up my living room with a bunch of dollar store Halloween decorations. Plastic skulls, fake spider webs, the whole 9 yards. I lit a few candles for atmosphere, and then, at exactly 11:55 p.m, we went live. Viewers were hyped. The chat was going nuts right from the start. You guys are gonna summon a demon. Don't mess with that stuff, bro. You know the usual. Some people thought it was dumb. Some were just there for the laughs, but a surprising amount of them actually seemed nervous, telling us not to mess around with it. We ignored them. The Ouija board itself wasn't even one of those fancy wooden ones. I'd grabbed a cheap cardboard version off Amazon for like $10. It even came with a plastic planchette. Honestly, it looked like it came out of a cereal box. We thought it was perfect for the stream because, again, we were not taking this seriously. Sam and I sat across from each other, the board between us, with my webcam angled down to show the whole thing. I told the chat to start throwing out questions for us to ask the spirits, and it was exactly the kind of stuff you'd expect. People were trolling, asking dumb things like, "What's my crush's name?" Or, "Is McDonald's ever going to bring back the McRib for good?" Sam was laughing, and I kept making dumb faces for the camera, pretending to take it all very seriously. We placed our fingers lightly on the planchette and started asking questions. And yeah, we totally faked the first few answers. We were moving the thing ourselves, spelling out random words to mess with people. At first, it was all fun and games, but after about 20 minutes, something weird happened. One of my regular viewers, someone with the username GhostGirl666, I know, real original, right? Sent a super chat asking us to try contacting a specific person. Now, I don't remember the exact name she gave us, but it was something old-fashioned. Like, really old. Like 1800s old. Eleanor. Something. It wasn't a name I'd ever heard before, but Ghost Girl seemed pretty insistent, even a little serious. I read it out loud, laughing, and Sam rolled his eyes. "All right, chat, let's see if we can reach old Eleanor," I said, mocking a ghostly voice. We asked the usual stuff. "Eleanor, are you there? Eleanor, if you can hear us, move the planchette." I was half expecting the chat to start spamming jokes about it, but instead the comments slowed down. People were watching, waiting. Sam and I stared at the board for what felt like forever. Nothing happened. I was about to crack another joke when I felt it. The planchette moved. Not like the small, shaky movements we'd been doing earlier. This was different. It was a smooth, steady glide, and neither of us were pushing it. I looked up at Sam, expecting to see him grinning or messing around, but he looked just as confused as I felt. We were both barely touching the thing. The chat exploded. "Did you see that? No way! You guys are faking this." But here's the thing. This time, we weren't. Sam gave me this look like, "Dude, what the hell?" And I shrugged, trying to stay calm for the stream. I mean, it had to be one of us, right? I told myself it was probably just muscle memory or something. Maybe we'd subconsciously moved it. Then the planchette stopped, right on the letter E. I thought that was weird, but maybe just a coincidence. We kept going. "Eleanor, if you're here, what do you want?" I asked, still trying to keep my tone light. The planchette moved again. This time, it spelled out the word, "watch." "What does that mean?" Sam asked, but the planchette was still moving. It spelled out 3 more letters, Y, O, U. The air in the room felt heavy, like the temperature had dropped. I glanced at the chat, half expecting people to laugh it off or call it fake, but they weren't. Most of them were dead silent. A few were spamming, "Turn it off!" But I didn't. We kept going. I swear, the second that planchette spelled out U, the vibe of the whole stream shifted. I could feel it in the air, like some invisible weight pressing down on me. It wasn't just me either. Sam stopped smiling. He wasn't cracking any more jokes, just staring at the board like he was waiting for it to move again. Even the chat was different. The playful trolling had all but disappeared, replaced by things like, "That's creepy as hell," and "This feels off, dude." I should have stopped right there. I should have told Sam we were done, shut the stream down, and called it a night. But of course I didn't. I mean, the numbers were good. We had more people watching than ever before, and the curiosity in the chat was only fueling me to keep going. It was just a dumb piece of cardboard, right? "Okay, Eleanor," I said, forcing a grin and trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "What do you want with me?" The planchette didn't move at first. Sam was sitting completely still, fingers lightly resting on the edges, just like mine. We waited and waited, and then, out of nowhere, it shot across the board so fast that it knocked one of my fingers off. "G-O-T-O... Got to. Got to what?" I muttered, glancing at Sam, but he just shook his head, as clueless as I was. I didn't even get a chance to finish my thought before the planchette started moving again. G-E-T-O-U-T. Get out. I think I actually laughed out loud when it finished spelling that. The irony, right? The classic horror movie line. I was just about to make some snarky comment when my phone, which had been sitting on the table next to me, buzzed. It startled me, not because my phone went off, but because it buzzed 3 times in quick succession, back to back. I picked it up, thinking maybe it was my girlfriend texting me to tell me the stream was cringe or something, but it wasn't her. I had 3 missed calls, all from a blocked number. Now, let me tell you, I've gotten prank calls before, especially while streaming, so I didn't think much of it at first. I set the phone back down, trying to stay focused on the stream, but then it buzzed again, another missed call. This time the number wasn't blocked, but it was something weird, like 000-000-0000. I showed it to Sam, half laughing, thinking. I showed Sam my phone, laughing it off like it was nothing, but deep down, something wasn't sitting right. It wasn't the fact that I was getting weird calls. That's par for the course when you're online. No, it was the timing. Right after the board said, "Get out." It felt too close, too connected. Still, I didn't want to look like I was spooked in front of Sam or the stream. "Probably just a viewer trolling," I said, shaking it off. "Nice try, guys. You almost got me." But Sam wasn't laughing anymore. His face was pale, and he was staring down at the board like it was something he'd rather not be touching. "We should stop, man," he muttered, barely loud enough for the mic to pick up. I wasn't used to seeing Sam rattled. He was usually the guy who laughed at scary movies and called ghost hunters fake. But this time, he wasn't playing. "Nah, we're good," I said, trying to brush it off, but even I could hear the forced confidence in my voice. That's when the first message popped up in chat. It was from a viewer named KellyRocks27, one of my regulars, always active in chat. Normally, Kelly's messages were chill, just talking about the games I played or making jokes. But this one was different. All it said was, "Turn it off. Something's wrong." I blinked at the screen, confused. I didn't even have time to react before more messages started pouring in, all from different usernames, saying similar things. "Yo, this is getting weird. Dude, I just heard something outside my window. Anyone else feeling sick right now?" At first, I thought it was part of the game. You know, people playing along, trying to add to the creepy vibe. But the more I read, the more it seemed like they weren't joking. People were saying they felt dizzy, cold, like they were being watched. And then, Kelly Rock sent another message. "I'm serious. Something's not right. There's a woman outside my house." Now, I knew Kelly. She was one of the chillest people in chat, never the type to troll or overreact. I even paused the game a few streams ago to wish her a happy birthday live. So when she said there was a woman outside, I didn't think she was kidding. "Yo, Kelly, you good?" I asked, hoping maybe it was just a coincidence or maybe she was trying to scare me back. The chat was flying now, with people either telling us to stop or demanding we keep going. But Kelly didn't respond. I looked at Sam, who was now pacing around the room, clearly freaked out. "Dude, let's call it," he said. But before I could agree or disagree, Kelly sent another message. "She's at the window. Her face." That was it. No more from Kelly. The chat erupted, everyone asking her what was going on, if she was okay, but nothing. It was like she had just vanished from the stream. The whole mood shifted from fun spooky to genuinely unsettling. "All right, guys, we're just going to chill for a second," I said, trying to take control of the situation. I pushed the Ouija board away from me, but as soon as I did, my phone buzzed again. I looked down, expecting another prank call, but this time it was a text, a random number, one I didn't recognize. And the text? It just said, "Look outside." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't want to freak out in front of the viewers, but everything in me told me not to look. I glanced at Sam, and he must have seen the look on my face because he whispered, "What is it?" I showed him the phone, and for a split second I thought maybe he'd laugh, tell me it was just some viewer playing a trick. But instead, his face went blank. "Dude, the window." He didn't say anything more, but he didn't have to. Slowly, both of us turned to look at the window behind me. It's a big window, covered by thin curtains, so I couldn't see much outside. The streetlight out front barely illuminated anything, just casting faint shadows across the grass. I felt my stomach drop. There was a silhouette. A figure, standing just beyond the glass. Too dark to make out any details, but definitely human-shaped. Sam backed away, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "Turn the stream off, man. Now!" But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the figure, my breath shallow. I reached out for my mouse, trying to end the stream without taking my eyes off the window. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, motionless, watching. And then, without warning, it was gone. Just like that. 1 second it was there, and the next, gone. I didn't even see it leave. It just vanished. The chat was in full panic mode now. People were screaming at me to stop the stream, telling me to get out of the house. But all I could do was sit there, staring at the empty space outside the window, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. Sam was already halfway to the door, his phone in hand, probably ready to call 911 or something. That's when Kelly Rock sent one final message. "I can see her face now. I think she's inside." The moment I saw Kelly's message, "I think she's inside," my blood went cold. The chat was in complete chaos, and I couldn't blame them. People were spamming, "Is this real? Call the cops! Dude, get out of there!" I couldn't focus on any of it. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. Sam, on the other hand, was already done with all of this. He grabbed his jacket, threw it over his shoulder, and said, "I'm out, man. I'm not sticking around to find out what happens next." I didn't even blame him. I kinda wanted to bolt too, but it was my house, my stream, and I felt this weird responsibility to stick it out, at least until I figured out what the hell was going on. But there was that text, that damned text telling me to look outside, and then that figure at the window. The silhouette was burned into my brain, and I couldn't shake it. Every part of me wanted to look again, to see if she was still there, but I was too afraid to move. What if she was? What if she wasn't? Sam was halfway out the door when it slammed shut on its own. I swear to God, neither of us touched it. It just slammed hard, like someone on the other side had kicked it shut. Sam jumped back, his eyes wide. "Dude, did you—" "I didn't do anything," I interrupted, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit. The atmosphere in the room had changed again. It was thick, suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of it and replaced with something else, something heavy. We both stood there for a minute, just staring at the door, waiting for it to open again. But it didn't. The house was dead silent, except for the low hum of my PC still streaming everything live. I could see the chat scrolling by in the corner of my eye, but I didn't have the nerve to look at it. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A tap. Gentle at first, barely noticeable, like someone was tapping their finger against the window. I turned to face it, my heart racing, and sure enough, the tapping got louder. 3 knocks, clear, deliberate. Someone was definitely outside. Sam whispered, "I'm not looking, man." "You look." I didn't want to. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, to ignore it, but something about the way the tapping sounded. It wasn't just random. It was rhythmic. Like whoever, or whatever it was, wanted us to know they were there. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to make the dumbest decision of my life, and slowly pulled back the curtain. At first, I didn't see anything. The street was quiet, no one out there, not even a shadow where the silhouette had been before. I let out a breath, relieved but still uneasy, when Sam spoke. Dude." I followed his gaze, and my heart stopped. On the window, smeared across the glass in what looked like dark, watery streaks, was a handprint. A huge, pale handprint. It wasn't there before. "Is that blood?" Sam whispered, but I couldn't answer. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to get close enough to find out. And then the tapping started again, but this time it wasn't coming from the window, it was coming from inside the house. I turned around so fast I nearly tripped over the chair. Sam was frozen in place, staring at the hallway that led to the back of the house. The tapping had moved. It was like it was walking, following us. It was slower now, almost taunting, like whatever it was wanted us to follow. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed my phone and tried to call Kelly. Maybe I thought if I could talk to her, figure out what was happening on her end, I'd be able to make sense of it. I dialed her number, but it didn't even ring, just straight to voicemail. But before I could try again, the tapping stopped. We stood there, listening, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable, like the calm before a storm. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps coming down the hallway, getting closer and closer. They weren't mine, and they sure as hell weren't Sam's. Sam started to back up toward the door, and I wasn't far behind him. "Let's just go, man," he whispered, eyes wide. But as soon as he reached for the handle, the footsteps stopped. The lights flickered, dimming for a second before going completely out. The only light left was the faint glow from my monitor, casting weird shadows across the room. I heard the chat blowing up in the background, but I couldn't focus on it. I was too busy listening for those footsteps. They started again, but this time they were faster, closer. Something was coming down the hallway. I grabbed Sam by the arm, yanking him away from the door, and we ran to the other side of the room, standing as far away from the hallway as possible. I don't know what we thought was going to happen. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The footsteps slowed down, and then they stopped, right at the edge of the hallway. For a long moment, nothing happened. We just stood there holding our breath, waiting. And then slowly, a shape emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, pale, gaunt, with long, dark hair hanging in wet strands over her face. Her eyes, God, her eyes, were completely black, empty, like bottomless pits. She wasn't walking. She was just there, standing at the end of the hallway, staring at us. Her mouth twitched into this grotesque smile, like she knew something we didn't. I couldn't move. Neither of us could. It felt like time had stopped. And then she spoke. Her voice was low, raspy, and somehow familiar. "I've been watching." That's when the stream cut out. The moment the stream cut, everything went dark. It was like someone had pulled the plug on reality itself. No light from my PC, no glow from the monitors, just total, suffocating blackness. Sam and I stood frozen, too scared to even breathe. I could still feel the presence of that woman at the end of the hallway, like her eyes were burning holes into us, even though I couldn't see her anymore. "Sam," I whispered, trying to force my voice to work. "We need to get out of here." But before he could answer, a sound cut through the silence, a faint static, like a TV that's lost its signal. The noise was coming from my PC, which had somehow powered itself back on, even though the house was still pitch black. The screen flickered to life, but instead of showing the usual desktop, there was a video playing. It was my stream, but not the one I'd been broadcasting. It was showing us. Sam and me, standing there, frozen in my living room. The camera had somehow turned itself back on. The angle was wide, capturing the entire room, including the hallway behind us. My blood ran cold when I saw it. The woman, standing there, staring right at the camera, still smiling. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Nothing there. No footsteps, no woman. But when I turned back to the screen, she was still there. Only now she was closer. Closer to the camera. Closer to us. "Dude, what the hell is this?" Sam's voice cracked as he backed up, his eyes glued to the screen. I had no answers, only more questions. I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't want to find out. "Unplug it," I muttered, panic rising in my chest. "Unplug the whole thing." Sam didn't argue. He darted over to the power strip and yanked the cord. The screen blinked out again, leaving us in darkness. But the static sound didn't stop. It was still there, louder now, like it was coming from all around us, filling the room with this awful, grating noise that made my skin crawl. And then, without warning, a voice, her voice, cut through the static. "You should have listened." The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Every hair on my body stood on end. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from inside the house. We were out of time. "Go, go, go," I shouted, grabbing Sam and pulling him toward the front door. We didn't care about anything else, just getting out of that house as fast as possible. Sam fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing right behind me. The door finally swung open, and we bolted out into the night, sprinting down the driveway, away from the house, away from the woman. Neither of us stopped running until we reached the end of the street, both of us panting, doubled over, trying to catch our breath. For a moment, everything was still, silent. We stood there, staring back at my house, half expecting to see her standing in the doorway, but there was nothing. Just the dark outline of my house, looming in the night. No lights, no movement. It was like the whole place had just shut down. "What the hell just happened?" Sam gasped, leaning against a lamppost, his face pale with fear. "I don't know," I whispered, my mind still racing. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and tried to check the stream. Maybe I thought there'd be some kind of explanation. Maybe I hoped someone in the chat had seen what we did. But when I opened YouTube, nothing. The stream wasn't there. It had been wiped, like it never existed. Sam shook his head, pacing back and forth. "Dude, we have to tell someone. This isn't normal. This isn't a prank, man. Something's wrong." I nodded, but I didn't know who to tell. The cops. What would I even say? That we summoned some ghost from a cheap Ouija board, and now she was following us around? No one was going to believe that. Hell, I didn't believe it, and I'd just seen it with my own eyes. Then my phone buzzed, a notification. My stomach dropped. It was an email. From Kelly Rocks 27. It took me a second to work up the courage to open it. The subject line was simple. "She's still watching." I opened the message and my heart sank. There was no text, no explanation. Just a single attachment, a photo. It was a screenshot from the stream, one that shouldn't have existed because the stream had been wiped. In the photo, you could see Sam and me sitting at the Ouija board, grinning like idiots. completely unaware of the dark shape standing in the corner behind us. It was her, the woman, and she wasn't smiling this time. Her face was twisted into something else, something wrong. Her eyes fixed directly on me, even through the screen. I showed it to Sam, and he went pale. This isn't possible. That stream's gone. How did she... Another buzz. Another email. This one had no subject, just a blank message with a video attached. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone, but I forced myself to press play. The video was short, maybe 5 seconds. It showed my living room, empty now, with the Ouija board still sitting on the coffee table. Everything was still, except for the planchette, which was slowly moving on its own. It spelled out a single word, over and over again. Come. I couldn't breathe. Sam stared at the screen, speechless, and I felt that cold weight pressing down on my chest again. The same weight I'd felt during the stream. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't over, and I wasn't the only one she was coming for. As if on cue, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my ears, and finally opened it. The message was simple, just 3 words. I'm with her. And it was signed, Kelly.